want to talk quickly about remedies. You probably noticed in the fly home story that there were a few remedies that came up that helped these buyers and sellers overcome the frictions that existed. Going back to the friction of inertia, does the idea represent a major break from the status quo? When we think about inertia, there are a few different ways we can address it, but one of the biggest is making something unfamiliar familiar. What we learned in the fly home story is that even though the process of buying and selling a home can be amorphous and multifaceted, fly homes created a process that was straightforward and gave confidence to buyers and sellers by making something that felt ambiguous and multivariable to familiar and executable and a roadmap that they could follow. So when it comes to inertia, one of the ways we can help people overcome the status quo is by making an unfamiliar idea seem a little bit more familiar. Think about your own new ideas. If it's a radical departure from what people are used to, how might you go about making that unfamiliar idea feel a little bit more comfortable to the end user? When it comes to effort, the question we're wrestling with is how much physical, mental, and economic exertion is required to implement that change. And when it comes to remedies for effort, one of the things that we want to keep in mind is streamlining. What are the biggest steps that a person must take in order to implement your idea? How might we make it easier to implement? How might we remove those small frictions that can produce huge results? And can you make it more effortful to actually have people say no to your idea than to say yes? Streamlining and making things a little bit easier is the job of user interface designers, user experience designers, and despite the fact that you are a business person or a nonprofit executive or a teacher or a salesperson, also remember that you're a designer, and if you think about how you might make things less effortful and less frictionful for your users, you will be thinking like a UX designer in almost anything that you do. What negative feelings might our ideas provoke in others? The human being, and all of us, has emotional, social, and functional needs. We also have emotional friction that stands in our way. How might we, in the words of Bob Mesta and Clay Christensen, focus on the why underneath the what? And how by understanding why people do the things they do, can we make things easier? Only by understanding that all cash offers represented certainty was Fly Homes able to find other ways of conveying that same sense of certainty that didn't involve their buyers coming to the table with a suitcase full of cash. Had they not understood the why behind the what, it's likely they would have continued throwing perks at people instead of really helping them make progress by removing that emotional friction for both buyers and sellers. And finally, reactance. Does the audience feel pressured to change? Rather than having change imposed on your audience, how might you have them participate in the design of the idea? If you go back to that story about Tushar speaking to that first seller's agent, what they were able to do by having her refer Tushar to her favorite lender in Seattle was co-designing a solution. They created the solution together, and by creating the solution together, the answer felt like a jointly owned answer versus Tushar just coming to sell her an idea. And by co-creating and co-designing ideas, we can make things feel like they have a greater sense of ownership for both the innovator as well as the end user. And when things have that feeling of ownership and inventorship, they're easier for people to get on board with. So when you're creating something for customers, whether it's B2C or B2B, how might you include your customers in the design process so that they too feel a sense of ownership and it's no longer your idea for them to react to, it's our idea for them to adopt. So remember, use friction maps and friction reports to help forecast the frictions that might stand in the way of your new idea. And think about how these different remedies might apply to your innovations in order to not just increase the fuel of the concept, but to remove the friction that stands in the way.